You eat them on pizza, in salads, and in sauces. The humble tomato is arguably the world's most versatile and popular fruit. But imagine a world where this humble staple was seen not as food, but as a symbol of death. For over 200 years, across much of Europe and North America, the tomato was known by a terrifying name: the poison apple. It was a fruit so feared that thousands of people across multiple continents would rather starve than touch it. Why? Why did one of the most successful foods in history face such intense, persistent suspicion? The answer is a surprising blend of botany, social class, and a crucial chemical reaction. This is the tragic and toxic history of the tomato. Our story begins not with food, but with fear, a fear rooted deep in the gardens of the New World. The journey of the tomato began safely in the Andes Mountains of South America, cultivated by early civilizations like the Incas. They knew it, they ate it, they loved it. When Spanish conquistadors brought the small yellow fruits back to Europe in the 16th century, the reaction was immediately mixed. In sunnier regions like Italy and Spain, the tomato was tentatively welcomed. However, in the colder, more skeptical climates of Northern Europe, and later in Britain and its North American colonies, the fear began to take root, rooted firmly in botany. But why did the botanists issue a deadly warning? The answer lies in one terrifying family, the Nightshade. The fear in America wasn't just folklore. Botanists were genuinely confused. They classified the tomato in the Solanaceae family, right alongside the deadly belladonna, or nightshade. This family produces solanine, a toxic alkaloid. To the eyes of 18th century scientists, the resemblance alone was enough to issue a deadly warning. This scientific misclassification gave the fear a powerful, seemingly intelligent justification. A powerful, scientific warning had been issued. Do not eat the fruit that resembles the killer. The myth of the poison apple was born, and it was about to spread. And spread it did. For the next 2 centuries, this scientific era became a genuine, terrifying reality across both Europe and North America. The fear in Europe wasn't just hypothetical. There were scattered, yet highly publicized, instances of individuals falling severely ill or even dying shortly after consuming tomatoes. These cases, often involving members of the aristocracy, served as undeniable proof for the skeptics. The rich were often the only ones experimenting with new foods, and when they got sick, the entire community took notice. It didn't matter that thousands of commoners might have been eating them safely in secret. One high-profile death was enough to sustain the myth for decades. In Britain, the tomato was relegated to a simple garden curiosity, grown only for its aesthetic appeal, not for consumption. Eating a raw tomato was considered a daring, almost suicidal act. The fear was a slow burn in Europe, but when the tomato reached America, it took a very public stand, off to even begin to break the curse. The fear metastasized when the tomato arrived in North America. For centuries, Americans were suspicious. It took a bold, public spectacle to even begin to crack the century-old myth. In 1820, Colonel Robert Gibbon Johnson of Salem, New Jersey, had finally had enough. He planned his famous public stunt. He would stand on the courthouse steps and consume a basket of tomatoes in front of a horrified crowd of nearly 2,000 people. Many got it, but expecting to witness the colonel writhe in agony and die a terrible death. But Johnson calmly ate the fruit, returned home, and lived to tell the tale. This event was a major turning point, but the fear was so deeply rooted that even this public defiance did not entirely save the tomato's reputation overnight. Even after witnessing a man defy death, the myth refused to die. Why? because the doctors themselves seemed to agree. The tomato was killer. Why didn't the myth just die? Because in the eyes of many physicians at the time, the logic was sound. When wealthy patients who had eaten tomatoes became violently ill with abdominal pain and gout, the diagnosis was easy. They weren't looking at what the food was served on. They were looking at the newest, strangest ingredient. The doctors, unfamiliar with the underlying cause, confirmed the suspicion of the general public. The tomato was the killer. This medical confirmation was the final nail in the coffin, ensuring the toxic reputation of the tomato would persist for another century, mainly among the upper classes. But if the tomato was truly poisonous, why did only the wealthiest people fall ill? The answer to the entire 200-year mystery lies in the shocking plot twists of this story. Here is where the history takes a sharp, crucial turn, the plot twist that solves the entire mystery. The simple answer is this: the tomato was not poisonous, but the only people who were falling seriously ill were the wealthy elite. Why? The answer is tied directly to their dinnerware. Commoners ate off wooden trenchers, earthenware, or simple iron plates, but the rich could afford fine plates made of pewter. Pewter was considered a high-status metal, but the pewter used in the 17th and 18th centuries often contained dangerously high concentrations of lead, silent, slow-acting, and cumulative poison. This is the moment of truth. The tomato was not the poison. It was simply the delivery vehicle for a deadly, unseen chemical reaction. This brings us to the moment of truth. The chemical reaction. The tomato, as we know, is highly acidic, containing citric and malic acids. Now, imagine a hot, acidic tomato sauce being served on a pewter plate. As the food sat on the plate, the acid from the tomato would actively leach the lead directly from the pewter metal and into the food. The tomato, in this scenario, was not the poison, but merely the catalyst, the innocent carrier that delivered a massive, concentrated dose of lead into the body of the wealthy consumer. The symptoms of severe lead poisoning, gout, abdominal cramps, and eventually death perfectly mimicked the symptoms the wealthy were experiencing. The food was simply holding the real poison. The wealthy were killing themselves, and the tomato took the blame. But how did the world finally figure out the true culprit? We can look at specific historical examples, like the case of Hugh Jones, a wealthy landowner in 1740s London. After a meal featuring a new tomato sauce, Jones suffered severe abdominal pain. His doctor, not looking at the plate, instantly blamed the poisonous New World vegetable. This incident became a published anecdote, further cementing the myth in the public consciousness. The myth only began to fade when dining habits slowly changed, as mass production brought less expensive and safer ceramic and porcelain plates to the market. The deadly pewter became obsolete. Once commoners, who couldn't afford lead-based pewter, started eating tomatoes safely off wooden or ceramic plates. The evidence against the tomatoes slowly accumulated. It was a victory of simple industrial progress over historical misunderstanding. The real killer was finally identified. Yet, like all good ghost stories, the myth of the poison apple was not quite ready to die. Even after the truth was known, myths die hard. The fear persisted in some circles well into the 20th century. Old wives' tales and folklore kept the idea alive, especially in rural communities. The saga of the toxic tomato perfectly illustrates how confirmation bias works. A few tragic deaths, an initial scientific misclassification, and an easy scapegoat, the strange new vegetable, were enough to rewrite history for over 200 years. It took time, education, and the power of food culture, particularly the rise of Italian Cuisinta fully secured the tomato's place in the global kitchen. Today, the tomato dominates our kitchens, but its toxic history leaves US with a fascinating lesson for the modern world. Today, the tomato is a multi-billion-dollar industry, essential to cuisines worldwide. The story serves as a fascinating historical footnote and a warning. Look beyond the surface. When you consider historical mysteries, always ask, who benefits from this belief? And what technology or simple error are we missing? For the elite who died of lead poisoning, the answer was always under their noses, more accurately, under their food. The simple, non-toxic tomato was blamed for the deadly habits of the aristocracy, leaving us with a truly bizarre moment in food history. The next time you enjoy your favorite pizza or pasta, take a moment to appreciate the journey of this misunderstood fruit. The next time you enjoy your favorite pizza or pasta, take a moment to appreciate the journey of this misunderstood fruit. It survived 2 centuries of being branded as a killer to become a global staple. If you found this historical mystery as fascinating as I did, please subscribe to the channel. Also, we uncover strange historical facts and solved mysteries every week. Check out the shorts version of this video linked below for the most shocking moment. Thank you for watching.